The first sign was silence, not a fight, not a door slammed, just the soft retreat of words that used to meet me at the doorway when I came home late from the studio, where the city's hum lingered on my clothes like old rain. And she would smile and steal it away with a kiss that tasted like coffee gone cold and promises kept warm by habit. But lately even the coffee cooled alone on the counter. A cup with a lip print that felt like a ghost of ceremony rather than presence. Dinners went from shared plates and teasing forks to separate islands on the same table, steam drifting up like prayer without an answer. And she would say she'd already eaten with a flat care that wanted to be kind, but sounded like packing paper stuffed into the spaces where laughter used to live. And it made the apartment feel like an empty room that remembered furniture by the scuffs on the floor. I told myself it was work, her deadlines, the season's pressure, the tiredness that lays a dull hand over people who do not sleep. But the way she held her phone with her shoulder turned said something older and simpler, like the posture of someone shielding a candle from a wind that was never mine. And I felt foolish for noticing so much and understanding so little. I began to learn the choreography of absence. Her showers at odd hours, the careful folding of clothes that never appeared in the hamper, the scent of a cologne I did not own turning up on the scarf I once bought her in a street market where we laughed too hard at bargaining. And each small thing felt like a drip from a ceiling you pretend isn't leaking, until the stain becomes its own weather map. One night the city was slick with rain, and the elevator climbed slow as if it too dreaded the long hallway. And I found the apartment washed in a gray that made the framed photos look like they had joined a quieter time, the one where we could still believe that love would carry everything that didn't fit into words. But the kitchen light was a single hard coin on the counter, and beside it, her wedding ring lay flat, an unblinking pupil in a world that refused to close its eyes. The note was short, its edges damp from her hand or the air or the way a truth sweats when forced through narrow lines, and it said she needed space, clarity, time, and it said I was a good man. And that kindness cut cleaner than contempt because it suggested the wound came from elsewhere, as if I were merely the place where her choices returned to wipe their shoes. I stood there and listened to the hum of the refrigerator negotiating with the rain, and the apartment felt like a mouth without breath. And I tried to remember when we last danced in the living room to a song that had no words, when the coffee was still hot at midnight, and the morning smelled like oranges and laughter. And memory became a lyre that folded pain with tenderness until it could be swallowed. When the first message appeared, unknown number, the simple practicalities of a life split into logistics, my stomach learned a new kind of gravity. And every beep sounded like a door closing 2 rooms away, and I realized how quickly the body translates news into posture, breath, smallness, and I wanted to be large, forgiving, gracious. But forgiveness is hard to carry when you don't yet know the weight you're forgiving. I did not call friends, did not pour a drink, did not make noise to drown the other noise. I took the ring and placed it in the smallest bowl on the counter, the one we used for pepper flakes and sea salt, and I watched it sit there like a coin no one would spend, and I felt like a cashier of memories, counting, recounting. Short a bill and unable to close the drawer. The rain thickened, a quiet applause for something ugly and inevitable, and I stepped to the window and saw our building mirrored in the street. Glass and brick bent by the water into a softer version of itself, and I thought, softness can be kindness or decay, and I didn't know which one I was watching happen to us. When the door finally clicked, it did not open. It clicked because I placed my palm against it to feel how the wood still held warmth from where she always pushed, and even the absence had body heat. And that was when it hit me that the collapse had begun long before tonight, and this was only the moment when the structure finally admitted it. I put her note in the drawer where we kept spare batteries and instruction manuals, because endings deserve a place among the things we keep for when something stops working, and I stood in the dark kitchen, listening to the apartment breathe as if it hadn't decided to let me drown. And then my phone lit the counter with a name I didn't recognize, and the message began with, "You don't know me, but," and the sentence cut with a kindness that carried a knife. Nights made new rules for me, and none of them included sleep. Only the long grind of a city settling its bones, while my chest tried to exhale a house fire, and the ceiling learned the outline of my eyes as I lay rehearsing explanations that did not ask for me to speak. Because the truth has a way of writing itself across your face before your mouth can decide if it believes in mercy. In the morning, the mirror returned a stranger with my haircut, and I noticed the small kindnesses she had always done without comment, the towel folded into thirds, the toothpaste cap screwed on straight, the coffee machine pre-filled, each one an echo now. a choreography that continued out of habit and then failed, like lights that still hum in a building after it's been evacuated. Her messages were patient, almost administrative. She needed time, wasn't sure about anything, didn't want to hurt me, didn't want me to hate her. Phrases like gauze that can cover a wound but cannot reverse the cut. And in their politeness, I found the loneliness of someone who keeps apologizing for stepping on your foot while forgetting they broke your leg. I did not respond at first, and silence made its own weather system. Clouds forming around the couch, where I once fell asleep against her shoulder, rain finding the corners of frames. And I realized how furniture remembers the weight of people long after they're done pretending to be comfortable. The other man appeared like a shadow that learned to speak. His first message was careful, and the second was braver, the third a confession that he hadn't meant for this to go this far, that he thought they were both unhappy in ways that had nothing to do with me. And grief does a petty thing, where it lists the ways you could have been better even when you know being better wasn't the point. I hesitated to meet him, but the body wants parameters. It wants to know the size of the room where the hurt lives. And so I agreed to a coffee shop with big windows and quick turnover, a place where people do not linger over old vows, and he was younger than me by a few years, with a watch that looked like it was counting something other than time. He told me he loved her in a tone that sounded like a man confessing he loved rainfall without ever standing in it, and he said he would take care of her. And I nodded because love is not a deed you claim at a counter. It is a set of dishes you keep washing even after the party leaves, and I wasn't sure he knew how to scrub. He asked if I planned to make things difficult, and I remembered the night she invented a pasta recipe from what we had in the fridge, and the way she clapped for herself, small and proud, and I realized that my revenge had already occurred. It was the archive of tenderness he would never touch, the stories I kept that would not pass to him, the versions of her that loved me first. Days built strange competence. I learned to cook the one-pot meals we used to do together, found a rhythm in cleaning that felt like caretaking rather than erasing, and the apartment slowly shifted from museum to shelter. Though some rooms remained off-limits in a way grief respects the tape across a crime scene even after the case is closed. Her mother called to ask if I was eating, and I lied kindly. And kindness is the most exhausting workout because it uses every muscle that wants to collapse and asks it to stand again. And afterward, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the empty chair where she used to lace her boots. A stage waiting for an actor who has taken a different script. When paperwork arrived, insurance lease, the life admin that turns love into bullet points, I kept my handwriting steady, as if clarity could redecorate the facts. And I signed where I was told to sign, the pen scratching like a small animal in the walls, busy and invisible. And it felt almost noble to be efficient in your own undoing. Then came the photo, sent by a mutual friend who meant well in the way. An earthquake means well by revealing a fault line, her and him outside a gallery. Her head tilted the way she used to tilt it toward me, like a plant searching a window, and I understood that knowing and seeing are different organs, and only one knows how to blade. That night it rained again. A forgiving rain that made the street smell like fresh dirt, and a kind of resilience arrived not as a speech or vow, but as a smaller, quieter act. I washed the bowl with her ring in it, dried it carefully, put the ring back as if setting a compass that still points to a map I've outgrown, and the phone buzzed with her name right as the glass clicked against the shelf. She came back on a Wednesday, the kind of midweek that pretends to be harmless, gray light, raised like a curtain on a stage we both claimed to have left, and when she stood in the hallway, there was a scent of rain and someone else's rideshare. And her eyes held the tired shine of a person who has memorized lines they can't stand to say again. "Can we talk?" she asked, as if talking were a new invention, as if our mouths had not been factories manufacturing the same explanations for months. And I stepped aside because generosity had become muscle memory, and because I wanted the apartment to know I still knew how to open doors. In the kitchen, she hovered near the counter, where the ring sat in its small bowl. And she looked at it the way you look at a photo of yourself with a haircut you wish you hadn't tried, and she said his name without naming him. Speaking of confusion and pressure, and how she had needed to know if the life she'd built was hers or inherited habit. I listened, and if there was a trick to it, it was noticing the way she held her hands. Thumbs rubbing the edges of her fingers as if trying to find a seam to open, and I remembered the way those same hands used to cover my eyes from behind, playful, certain, and how certainty ages faster than faces. She cried softly, which was worse than any storm, because softness can move whole landscapes over time, and she said she had made a mistake, the large, unwieldy kind that takes a season to wrap in sentences. And the word mistake sat in the air like a cracked plate we both pretended could still be used for company. "I don't expect anything," she said, and she meant it, and meaning it hurt more than her asking for absolution. Because at least absolution is a task, but this was silence dressed as respect, and I found myself wondering when respect began tasting like dust. We walked the apartment like docents, touching the backs of chairs, glancing at framed landscapes we'd chosen together in a weekend march through street art, and she told me there were things she had discovered about herself, needs she had not named because needing looked like weakness where she came from. And I wanted to tell her that weakness is only the word people use for the courage to ask. When we reached the bedroom doorway, she paused, and the room felt like a courtroom and a chapel, a place for vows and verdicts. And the morning light was beginning to gather in the far corner like a child stacking blocks, and I could not decide if the light was innocent or complicit. She asked if I could ever trust her again. And I thought about trust as a bridge we built with weekends and groceries and bad television and the hundreds of small jokes that only make sense if you were there. And I realized the bridge hadn't fallen so much as it had been moved. The land shifted under it, and neither of us knew the new map. I told her there was dignity in not pretending to be the people we no longer were, and there was love in refusing to punish each other with versions of us we could not recover. And she nodded like someone agreeing with a lyric that doesn't apply to them anymore, but still makes them sway. We sat at opposite ends of the couch and let the city come up through the windows, traffic like a patient animal. And she said she left him 2 nights ago, and I felt a small, poor version of victory that I did not want to keep, and I let it go because victories like that rot fast. When she reached for the ring, she didn't pick it up. She just placed a fingertip on its edge, making it wobble in a small orbit, and I watched the metal spin and catch the light and settle. And we both understood that something had already decided itself somewhere we could not follow. She stayed for tea, both hands wrapped around the mug, as if heat could be stored in fingers like currency. And we spoke of the practical future in a way that tried to be gentle with the past, and when she stood to leave, she looked at the chair where she laced her boots and didn't sit. And the quiet that followed her out felt like a door learning to close without slamming. At the threshold she turned as if to say something final, but the sentence lost its shoes on the way to her mouth. And she shook her head and smiled in the small, apologetic way people do at funerals when they realize humor still exists, and then the door closed. And a draft moved through the apartment, as if something lighter had just stood up and left the air. Morning arrived like a favor, slow and careful, a thin gold ribbon on the floorboards that didn't demand anything. And the city sounded far away for once. The traffic softened into a purr that made even the kettle feel like it was speaking in an inside voice. And in that quiet, the apartment felt less like a verdict and more like a room. I brewed coffee the old way we used to on Sundays, the measured pour that darkened the filter like rain meeting dry earth. And the smell carried a memory that didn't bite, only nodded from a distance, like an acquaintance you once loved and now simply wish well, and that was the first moment that didn't hurt in a language I could understand. On the balcony, the morning had the clean face of a child sent to apologize, and the plant she always overwatered had perked its leaves toward the light, and it occurred that perhaps everything is always reaching, even in the wrong direction first. And that reaching is the point more than the finding. I took the ring from the bowl, warm now from the dishwasher heat still held by the cupboard, and I turned it in my fingers until the light found the small scuff she got when we moved in. The day we carried our couch like a joke, and she said the first dent would make this place ours, and I laughed then at the romance of scratches, and I did not laugh now. Forgiveness arrived without her present to receive it, which felt correct and strange, like finishing a letter you never intended to mail, and I understood that forgiveness wasn't a doorway back, but a window open to a new weather, one that did not promise sunshine. Only a breeze that didn't smell like smoke. I did not text her. I wrote her name on a scrap of paper and then folded it small until the fibers complained, and I placed that folded noise beneath the ring. And I placed both into a small velvet box that once held a pendant we bought at a night market. And I tucked the box into the back of the drawer where people store their emergency light. The chair where she laced her boots looked simply like a chair again, 4 legs and a seat, wood grain soft as if someone had sanded the past out of it. And I sat there and tied my own shoes, not to go anywhere special, just to feel the knot form and hold, because some mornings you need proof that your hands can still make something stay. Outside, the sidewalks wore last night's rain like a sheen of promise, and the air did that early trick where it pretends to be new, and a bus sighed, and a dog dragged its human toward a trash can full of sweet rot, and the world, unbothered by my private collapse, kept working, which felt less cruel than reassuring. When I returned, the apartment no longer waited for me. It welcomed me gently, like a book left face down and then picked up at the same line, and I understood that endings are not places but permissions, and I had just given mine. Later, in the kitchen, a small beam of sun set down on the counter where the ring had been, and there was nothing there to catch it, and the light did not mind. It warmed the empty space as if emptiness could be a body, and I let it. And when the phone buzzed with her name, I let it finish, watched the screen dim, heard the quiet reclaim its shape, and I exhaled something I had been holding since the first silent dinner, something that did not belong to me anymore, and the room, kind as morning, did not ask for it back. Room, kind as morning, did not ask for it back.